Okay, great. So thank you everyone for joining us today. We're really excited to have you here, and thank you for joining us in the evening. Obviously it's family time, so we really appreciate it. We'll try to keep it short and to the point and get as much information across as possible. But we have seen that this topic is relevant at the moment, and a lot of people are asking us about it. So we thought, why not have a quick webinar about it and give some of our knowledge from our experiences within sheriff's auctions through to people that are looking at buying investment properties during an auction. So I'm going to go right into it. What I did want to say is that if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please drop them in the chat box or in the Q&A portal. And then at the end of the webinar, we will, if we get some time, just go through some of those questions and answer them. But if we don't get to it, please do send us an email on info@redoakproperties.co.za, and we will answer them as much as possible. So let me go into introduce our speakers for tonight. So we've got Willie Roos here. He is the CEO at Stratafin. And Willie has practiced as a property attorney for over 20 years. He specialized in property law and has conducted collections on behalf of the major financial institutions for bond recoveries. In this capacity, he has auctioned hundreds of properties on behalf of the banks, so he's well versed in the collection and auction process. He was a director of one of the major estate agencies in South Africa and has been involved in sectional title management for over 8 years. Willie has also been the CEO of Stratafin for the past 7 years, and Stratafin specializes in the assisting of bodies corporate with funding solutions. In the event of non-payment of levy, Stratafin will assist in the collection process, which can result in the sale of the properties through the sheriff's auctions. And then we've also got Mareliza here, Mareliza de Toit. She's the head of legal at Stratafin. Mareliza is an admitted attorney and the current head of legal at Stratafin. She has worked in debt collection for the past 4 years, of which 2 have been in bank collections and the other 2 in levy collections. She oversees the Stratafin levy debt collections, which ultimately leads to the selling of properties at sheriff auctions. And Mareliza has attended numerous sheriff auctions during her time with Stratafin and has in-depth knowledge about how they work and what to look for when attending an auction. So I'm going to hand it over to Willie and to Mareliza to take you through.
Good evening, guys. Thanks for the opportunity to have a chat with you guys. This webinar stems from a discussion that we had on one of the property groups where people started asking about sheriff's auctions, and I gave a couple of answers, and people then said, can you not have a webinar and assist us a bit and give us some knowledge in this respect, because it's something that we would like to know about. And we then at Stratafin and at Red Oak Properties decided to put this together so that we can share a bit of knowledge in this respect. So there's a couple of top tips that we want to share with you guys and just have a discussion about it. And I think the first one is research. How to avoid a bidding war, calculate the cost before you're making a bid, then what happens after you've made the bid, and then other alternatives. So we'll go into all those 5 subjects and have a chat about those. So the first one, research, is you should never go to a sheriff's auction unprepared. You need to know what properties are on auction, and you need to know what those properties are worth. So we've got the 2 websites where you can actually go and check and see what properties are going on auction throughout the sheriffs with the various sheriff offices. And then also where you can have a look at the value of properties at Lightstone. It's a paid service where you then pay and do a valuation on your properties and the surrounding properties where you're going to purchase, so that you have an idea of what that area goes for and what the properties go for. So it's important that you do these things. We will go into that slightly more later on, but I think that's sufficient at this moment. So
Yeah, and a very good one. Sorry, Willie, a very good one is to find out who your managing agents are. You can easily get those by phoning the attorneys who is doing the auction. They'll happily give you the contact details of the managing agent, and those guys will be the best to give you a good idea of the financial health of the managing of the body corporate, all of the levies and taxes that are generally paid. Well, these rates you can obtain through the municipality. And just then also get a good idea of the income, the rental income that you can expect from this type of property. So it's very important just to get a good background, and I think definitely the guys on the ground are a good start.
Yeah, Mareliza is correct. I mean, most managing agents are also estate agents in the real sense of the word, where they are selling properties and do rentals as well. So they would definitely know what type of rental you would be able to achieve in that complex. So it's a good idea to have a chat to the managing agent and find out what rentals are achieved in those properties, so that you can actually determine your yield. But we'll have a chat about that a bit later on. So it's important. And then also, like Mareliza said, to know what is going on in the complex, to have a look at the financials and so forth. But we will talk about that a bit later on.
Yeah, so, and what we want to put out here is just to make sure that you understand as a buyer at an auction that you'll be liable for specifically the bond if there's a reserve price placed by the high or the court, who's ever selling the property or authorized the order. Upon purchasing, in order to get your clearances, you'll be required to pay your levies, the rates, all overdue levies and rates that has been accumulated, obviously leading to the auction. Another very important thing that people often forget is just make sure that you understand, or that you know if the property is tenanted. We quote here "huur gaat verkoop," so this is a legal term where we it's the tenant that's in the property, so the rental agreement is above the purchase agreement. So obviously once the property is purchased, this lease agreement will stay in place. So it's stuff like, for example, you might come across a property where there's a 5-year lease agreement, and the tenant is paying at about R1,000 a month, which is not sufficient to pay your levies, your bond, and so forth. So it's necessary to get this. This is very important. And then obviously your registration fees and what you need to pay to join the sheriff auction.
So Tertius is right. I mean, I saw just he made a comment. Properties are first auctioned with the lease, and then if not sufficient money is obtained on that sale, then it is sold without the lease, and that can also take place. So it's depending on what is going to happen at that specific auction. So you need to make sure, like Mareliza says, that you know exactly what is going on at that auction, and how the property is being sold, because that lease agreement stands in front of your purchase agreement if it's sold with the lease, and you will then be bound by that agreement, and you will then have to comply with the agreement as the new owner of that property. Also, in respect of the selling of the property, like Mareliza said, when the property is sold, one will have to go and look what the order was. Was the order that there must be a reserve price on the property? And that will then be normally the starting bid, the reserve price. The order can also make provision that the property can be sold at a lower price, and then the court can be then asked to accept that lower price, or the bank can be asked to accept that lower price. But Mareliza will tell us a bit more about that later on. So it's also important to go and attend a couple of auctions before you start bidding, so that you actually get the feel of what happens at these auctions. So as I said earlier on, go and have a look where there are auctions, go to your local sheriff's website, and make sure that you know when these auctions take place, get your valuation in place, know what the properties are worth in that specific building, and if it's a freestanding unit, what they are selling in that specific area. Know what the transfer and bond costs are. You can easily, I mean, if you guys are already in the game, you will know that you can go to a site like Uber, where they can do a valuation, or on the valuation of the property, they can determine what the transfer and bond cost will be in respect of that. So we've got a couple of sites where you can actually go on there and go and check out what this will cost you, because obviously that will influence what you will pay in respect of that property.
And just to say that we will share these slides after the fact, so after the webinar, so you will have access to these links.
Perfect. Okay, so the next one, avoid a bidding war. Mareliza, you know a lot about this.
Yeah, so it's very tempting not to definitely get caught up in the hype of the moment. So it's very important to upfront determine how much are you willing to spend on this property, or what your purchase price would be. Now, a common mistake that people will often make is to go prepare a valuation on the property, and they will not take into consideration all of the other costs that will be liable by them. So my suggestion, or our suggestion, is, for example, when a property is worth 300,000, go and make sure that you calculate properly how much you will spend on levies, how much you will spend on all of the different clearances, the bonds, etc., the sheriff's commission, and the transfer fees, and what the balance is after that. So for example, if all of your costs would be at about 150, like I said, the property is worth 300,000, then make an offer, so based on the balance, so the 150,000. But it's important to try, or it will depend on, you know, the hype of the moment, like I said, but try and go as below or beneath the market value. So what, perhaps then make an offer on 100,000 rand, so then you know you purchased the property for 50,000 rand under property value. So then you know at least you've gotten, you know, you've gotten a bargain out of the auction.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like Mareliza says, you must determine exactly what all those costs are, and then take that off the value. Then what is left, you then decide what percentage of that are you prepared to pay, say 70% or 60% or 50%, and then you purchase at that price. It's also important that you go and, like we said earlier on, that you determine what rental you will be able to achieve in respect of a property, so that you can actually determine what your yield will be. So your yield is a very simple calculation or the simple calculation of yield is just to multiply your rental income over the 12-month period divided by the value of your property. That will give you a simple yield. And a yield at 15%, I would think, is an excellent type of yield. I mean, commercial properties are being sold anything from 8 to 12%. So if you can get a 15% yield on your property, you will be doing good in that respect. But it's also important that you to stop the hype, that you make a decent bid. Don't get involved in the 1,000 rand up, 1,000 rand up, because then you're going to get caught in the moment and you're going to exceed what you want to do. So determine, this is what I want to pay, and then you say, if you wanted to pay the 100,000, go to 90,000 or 80,000. Start with that, and then go up from there. But don't start with the small little numbers, because then all you're going to do is you're going to attract everybody else in the room to also throw in their 1,000 rand here and 5,000 rand there.
And everyone else are going to get caught up in the hype. So correct. Then you're going to keep chasing each other.
Yeah. So we have seen where we go in with a proper offer. We normally cut the rest of the bidders out. They immediately know that these guys are serious. They want to buy. And they then leave that property alone, and they're not going to go in on that.
And it's quite a dog show. I mean, if you get distracted and you just join in on the discussions, I would definitely avoid that. Or I'd suggest that you avoid that.
It's also important not to get involved with the crowd. We, from our point of view, where we sell lots of properties, we understand what's going on at these auctions. There are a lot of property hijackers that are making use of the auction process to hijack properties. So their business model is to pay a small deposit, the sheriff's fee, then to get rental income, because we'll discuss that later on. You are entitled to the rental income during the process of the transfer. To get the property, to get the rental income, and then to accumulate that income as far as possible. And when the deal is then cancelled, they lose the small deposit, but hopefully they've made more money out of the rental than what they're losing on the deposit. So this is the way that they hijack these auctions, and they get very aggressive if they want to hijack buildings, and they start screaming and shouting. So we have seen, if you position yourself in front at the sheriff's auction, you don't look left and right, you don't have a chat to anybody, you just do your bid, you wave your little flag when you want to bid, and you do your thing, and you don't get involved in all of that. Then they also tend to leave you alone. So don't get drawn into discussions with the crowds.
And definitely read the crowd. I mean, you'll quickly pick up once you've stepped into their territory. I mean, we've seen where they will literally take someone outside, and I don't know what happens outside, but then the person, So you'll pick up. So read the crowd and rather walk away, like we say there. You'll find proper.
Yeah, we actually recently, I would think that was about 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago, in one of the auctions in Johannesburg, a bidder got involved in a property which the hijackers clearly wanted. He was pushing up the price, and it was going up by 1,000 rand. And at some stage, they started screaming and shouting and pushing. He then went to the passage, and at the end of the day, that deal was, or the sale was cancelled. So Mareliza is right, and we don't know what happened to him, because when we left the auction, they were still shouting outside of the building at him, and something was going on there, and we left. So Mareliza is absolutely right. If you see something is amiss, then rather walk away. Don't get involved in that. We see that they can get aggressive, but if you follow the steps that we said, I mean, come in with a high offer, or offer close to what you want to bid, sit in front, don't get involved with them, don't talk to them, don't entertain any conversations, you will see that they tend to leave you alone. Also understand the conditions of the sale beforehand. As we said earlier on, if there's a reserve price, understand what type of reserve price it is. Is it a reserve price in respect of a bond that's over the property, where the bank gave a COB, or certificate of balance? And if they did, then obviously the sheriff won't be able to sell for less than that, unless the order says that the sheriff can accept lower offers, but then it has to go back to the bank or the court for confirmation of that sale. So listen carefully, because sometimes you can pick up a good deal in that respect, where there is a certificate of balance in place or a reserve price in place, but the bank will then accept a reasonable lower amount. So say, for example, the amount that the bank requires, 250,000 Rand for the bond to be cancelled, and you then make an offer for 200. We have seen in many instances that at the end of the day, the bank will rather accept the 200,000 Rand than to go through the whole process of selling the property again, advertising again, and in a similar fashion, the body's corporate as well. They would rather accept a lower amount just to make sure that they've got a new buyer in place and somebody that can then pay levies and be a responsible owner. So listen carefully what is said in respect of the reserve price. Understand the differences. Know what participation costs you need to pay. There are sheriff's auctions where a higher participation cost is required. So in some auctions, they require 150,000 Rand to partake in that auction. In some instances, only 1,000 Rand. And in other instances, they would require 5,000 Rand and so forth. Let me just read this. Sorry, I missed that by Tertius. He wanted to ask something, but be that as well, we'll come back to that later on. So make sure that you know what that cost is and that you do have that at hand. It normally has to be paid upfront prior to the auction for you to even take part. Sheriffs don't necessarily accept cash any longer, so you will have to be able to pay it by bank deposit or EFT prior to the auction taking place. Then also, where a small participation deposit was required, make sure that you have the means to pay the balance of the amount payable at the fall of the hammer. Because if you can't pay that within 15 minutes of the sale, the sheriff will cancel the sale and resell the property. So you need to make sure that you either have somebody on standby that can do an EFT, or you must have an app on your phone so that you can do the EFT to the sheriff to make sure that the money goes to the sheriff immediately. If your participation fee was a very high fee, like for instance 100,000 Rand, and the deposit required in terms of the conditions of sale and the cost payable to the sheriff, and we'll deal with that just below here. If that is then less than 100 Rand, then in general the sheriff will deduct that from that deposit, but will also keep the participation deposit until such a time as you have complied with all the terms and conditions of that purchase agreement that you enter into when you're buying through the sheriff. The sheriff fees are normally, like I said, there's 6% on the first 100,000, 3.5% on 101,000 to 400,000, and then 1.5% on the balance of the purchase price, with a minimum of 3,000 Rand and a maximum of 40,000 Rand. That is normally court regulated. So you will see that throughout the country at all the auctions, you will have a similar structure in place, and that will be payable at the fall of the hammer. You will also be liable for the outstanding rates and taxes, because the conditions of sale makes you liable for that. So the rates and taxes that are outstanding on that property, and if it's a sectional title property, you will be liable for all the cost in respect of outstanding levies, and the clearance certificate will have to be obtained from the body corporate prior to the transfer of the property. So like Mareliza said earlier on, that is an amount that you must take into consideration when you make your bid. You can't purchase a property that's worth 250,000 Rand and then you offer 160 or 170,000 Rand on it, and there's outstanding levies of 200,000 Rand on it, because you will, in addition to the purchase price, be liable for that rates and taxes and that levy clearance certificate. And on top of that, you will have to pay also the transfer cost, and if you're going to purchase with a bond, also your bond cost. So then you're paying more for that property than what it actually is worth. And I mean, we don't see that happens in the market, that people will pay more for a property than what it's worth. Right, as I said, you're also liable for the transfer fees and the bond fees. That also
and
works
evictions, yeah,
on a sliding scale. And then also, absolutely right, Mareliza, factor in your eviction costs. So if you have a tenant in there or a person in the property that does not want to vacate, and I mean a bit of questioning of the managing agent beforehand will give you an idea if you're going to have a reluctant person, and factor that in. And an eviction can cost you anything from 30,000 Rand to 60,000 Rand for an eviction to take place. So make sure that you factor that in as well. So if you think that you're going to have a problem, rather pay that 30 or the 60,000 rand less for the property to make sure that you are not going to be saddled with a cost of eviction that now must go on top of your purchase price. That's going to bring your yield down because you've actually now spent not 250,000 rand, but you've spent 310,000 rand on that property. You're also going to be stuck with that property in that you won't be able to sell it later on because you've paid too much for it. And you won't be able to sell it because other properties in the market in the building will be selling at less than that, and you won't get a buyer that will be prepared to purchase that. So that's going to create some problems for you as well. So rather factor that 30 to 60,000 rand in there. I think Mareliza this afternoon, when we had a chat about this as well, she said, don't accept the price that the attorney gives you as well. We've got a couple of attorneys on here, Zerlinda. Yes, try and negotiate a good price with the attorney, and speak to them and ask them for a better price, and also build up a relationship with an attorney. So that you can always refer your legal work to that same attorney, and then obviously you will get a better price because you've got a relationship with that person and they know that this is not the only work that they will receive from you. Okay. Mareliza, will you take us through what happens after you've done that conditions of sale? What happens there?
Yeah, so immediately after you've completed the purchase or the conditions of sale, so you sign it right there at the auction. You need to pay the deposit and the sheriff's fee, like Willie mentions, immediately, or it will be deducted from your participation deposit, and then you will be liable for the purchase price. What's nice about auctions is that you are able to take occupation immediately. You can generate a nice income while you are waiting for the property to be transferred. And the sheriff, so you'll be informed by the sheriff who is the transferring attorneys. That's generally the attorney that arranged the auction. And you will then supply them with your FICA documents, and that will be then go to the transferring attorney. They will then obtain the clearance figures from council, as well as from the body corporate or the HOA, and you'll need to make payment. And then at some point you will pay the balance purchase price. And then once the transfer is lodged at the deeds office, the attorney will let you know, and they'll draft your final account. It does sound all very smoothly, but it can take up to 3 to 4 months. So it's very important, like I said earlier on, make sure who's in the property, so that you can start generating income as soon as possible after the auction.
There's just one other aspect. Although you are entitled to the rental income out of the property, you are also liable for interest on the purchase price. So the longer it takes for this property to transfer, the higher your purchase price actually runs, because there's interest running on it. So make sure that you've got the money available. Make sure that if you're going to purchase with a bond, that the banks will actually grant a bond in that area, that you will be able to qualify for a bond. Do that beforehand. Make sure where there's a second property, what percentage of your income will the bank grant you a bond on. In general terms, when it's a first bond, they would use 1/3 of your salary, but the more properties you purchase, the less they will give you. However, they will start taking into consideration a percentage of your rental income as income as well, but not the full income. Only a portion of that will be taken into consideration when determining your income. So make sure beforehand that you speak to a bond originator or one of the banks. Make sure that you build up that relationship as well, so that you know that you can get that bond over that property. Make sure I know that they don't like to say that they red line areas where they're not supposed to, or where they don't grant bonds, but you do find that in certain areas the banks don't grant bonds. So in those areas, if you purchase in an area like that, make sure that that you have the cash available to purchase that property. Otherwise, you stand to lose your participation deposit that's still lying with the sheriff. You stand to lose all the money that you've already paid to the sheriff, the deposit, the fees to the sheriff, and so forth. So you will lose all of that. And if you've purchased at the wrong price and you haven't received any rental income, then obviously you're going to be in a situation where you are in a lose situation.
So yeah, so this is my suggestion, which I've picked up just over the past years, which I think is quite useful to perhaps consider alternative solutions. We've got a lot of attorneys that would contact us asking if we know of purchasers or interested prospective buyers, or that's interested in properties, or that's interested into investing, and they would you'll often get debtors that's willing to sell prior to going on auction. So once they get handed over, they'll perhaps inform the attorney that, you know, they're not staying there anymore, if the property has been abandoned. And this also gives you a lot more time to apply for a bond and consider your options. And you'll minimize the clearance figures, because remember, the body corporate or the bond attorneys will add the legal fees onto the clearance figures. So you'll get a lower rate in terms of clearance figures, and you'll obviously have much more time to research the property properly. So you'll definitely be able to go and have speak to the managing agent, even perhaps drop by yourself. So this is a bit more in terms of time. It gives you much more lenience, and there are a lot of attorneys out there that's constantly looking for prospective buyers. Or then obviously you can join Red Oak and stay in contact with us, because we do have a lot of properties often.
Yeah, I can just say, I mean, from our sister company's point of view, Stratafin, where we assist bodies corporate with financial difficulties, and where we actually then go through the legal process and actually sell these properties in execution. We do have people that have followed us over the last 7 years, and that actually are purchasing units from us in various buildings. So they do what Mareliza says you should do with all the attorneys that do foreclosures. And they contact us and they constantly ask us, in what buildings are you operating now? Are there units that are coming on auction? Can we not purchase beforehand? Because in lots of these buildings, we find that owners that are in such dire straits would rather sell their property through a proper normal sale agreement than through the sheriff, because at the sheriff's auction, they will, in all probability, still have a liability towards the bank. And there can be other costs still involved for them, and they won't walk away scot-free, where if they sell the property at a reduced selling price, then at least they walk away clean, and they don't have any further liability, and maybe sometimes with a 10 or 15,000 rand in the pocket, so that they can actually start somewhere else afresh. So we see that, and Mareliza is absolutely right. Speak to those foreclosure attorneys, speak to Red Oak, speak to Stratafin, the people there, because we can assist. We have properties available the whole time. So currently we've got some properties available that we have purchased ourselves. There are units in Tygerberg, there's Panorama, there's Pearlbrook. So there are various units. These units will be sold with an eviction already in place. So we are going through the eviction process on these properties. So these properties at that price that you got there will be a clean property, and we have factored in already our cost in respect of the eviction process. So if you guys are interested, then obviously contact us at the office, and then you can have a discussion with the people at the office in respect of those properties. So yeah, so those are our tips in respect of sheriff's auctions. We're going to have a couple of questions. See if there are any questions. I read a question from Tertius. View on cash for keys.
Let me get Zelinda on, and maybe she can just
Elaborate.
elaborate, or a baseball bat.
So yeah, there is a movement where people are paid to move out. I mean, we also go through that process. We do have a discussion prior to us actually going through the eviction process. We do have a cash for keys discussion with the person in the property. And you are sometimes lucky and get a reasonable person. You also sometimes are not so lucky and get people that are just saying, sorry, I'm not gonna vacate. You must do what you must do to get me out of the property. But Zerlinda is also a property attorney. So Zerlinda, what is your point of view?
I've gone to quite a few auctions with my folks over the years, and there is in certain areas like known groups of people that will either, you know, take over a property and put somebody in that's rather intimidating, and sort of force the tenant out. Alternatively, to pay sufficient fees to get the tenant out, or to even find alternative accommodation for the tenant to get them out, as to avoid the legal process. So it'll be interesting to hear, you know, how often that actually happens, or is it also part of this like hijackers group?
So Zerlinda, we find in general that people don't want to move. I mean, where Stratafin operates, and in those buildings in general, if you're looking at the inner city properties, those people don't want to vacate, and you have difficulty even if you offer them a certain amount of money to vacate. And obviously one needs to weigh up the cost of an eviction against a payment to somebody to move, or assistance to move, or even a deposit in a different unit somewhere else, against the cost of eviction. But we in general find that people don't want to move. And obviously we don't go around sending heavies into properties. It's not the way that we operate. We go through the legal process. So if somebody tells us that they're not going to move, they're not prepared to do so, we won't send the heavies in to go and stay with them. But we've heard those stories. We heard that people are doing that. And they attain success with that, but that's not the way that we will operate. I mean, the reputational risk for our business is just too high for us to take a risk like that, to do something like that.
I see another question here from Tertius. What if the body corporate wants to purchase the unit?
So obviously now we're going into the sectional title sphere. When the body corporate wants to purchase units, then if I'm not mistaken, and Zerlinda, which is a sectional title specialist, she can confirm that, but I think it's a unanimous resolution that is required in respect of the purchasing of a property. Or property by a body corporate. So firstly, that body corporate will have to get a unanimous resolution. So the bar is quite high for a body corporate to actually purchase that. They need to have a 80% participation at a quorum of owners, and then they need a unanimous voting of all of those 80% of people that are there to make that decision if they want to purchase. So we see that it does happen. If it happens legally, I'm not so sure and certain, because in general, a body corporate is there to look after the interest of owners and not to become a property owner itself. So I don't know if that is a good thing or not. Zerlinda, your view on that?
I've only ever experienced it once. It was actually in my folk scheme where the property was not able to actually achieve any value. There was major structural issues to it. So the body corporate picked it up for next to nothing simply because nobody else was interested, and protected obviously the value of the body corporate by buying it themselves. They then had to pay quite a lot of special levies to, number one, pay for it, to number two, to deal with the structural issues. But then when they sold it, they were able to sell it for quite a substantial profit, and that actually boosted the body corporate
nice.
reserves for quite a while. So it was positive at the end of the day, but it was a long schlep and it cost a lot of money to get them to that point.
Okay, so there you've got that. Any other questions here?
Okay,
Daniela?
Paul sent a question here. How do we get this prospective buyer list? I think it had to do with the when we were talking about foreclosures and with the attorneys.
Yeah, so the alternative solutions. I mean,
Yes.
they can just contact info at Red Oak, definitely, and then we can keep them in the loop.
And obviously also if they want to purchase and not necessarily through Red Oak or through the Stratafin structure, but want to purchase through other attorneys, then if you go and have a look on the Government Gazette website, when the sales in execution are advertised, you will actually see who the attorneys are, in terms of attorneys that are on the bank panels, the foreclosure panels, and you will quickly see who they are. I mean, going through the advert, you will see the same names over and over. For example, the Netbank on the East Rand, it will be Tuckers and so forth. So yes, guys, can you hear me? I see that my internet connection is unstable.
No, we got
Hopefully I'm
that.
back now.
Yeah. Yeah, we got that.
Perfect. Any other questions?
So you will see, yeah, so you will see who those attorneys.
So I think what Willie's trying to say is on the Government Gazette, you'll definitely be able to find the list of names. You'll see constant names reoccurring. And then you can obviously see who the applicant is. So then you can see that's they act for that bank and that bank. And as well as if you see where the applicant is the body corporate and you can see the attorney advertised that matter, those are the guys that you can get in touch with. Am I correct? I see your back, Willie. Or not really?
No, I think he's still struggling with his internet,
Yes,
but that's
I'm
all
back.
right.
Am I back?
Okay.
All right.
Okay,
So
perfect.
yeah.
Well, there doesn't seem to be any more questions, but again, if anyone does have more questions after this, I know it's a lot of information to digest. So if you do have any questions after the webinar closes, please feel free to send them to info@redoakproperties.co.za. Go onto our website if you're struggling with the email address, and all of our contact details are there. It's www.redoakproperties.co.za.
Can I just say, if the property is sublet illegally, I mean, you still have to go through the eviction process in respect of all those people and everybody that is occupying the property as a result of that person. So anybody that is in the property will be evicted if you follow the process correctly. So you will have to go through that legal process, and it's quite an onerous process. But obviously, the eviction process, yeah, it's quite an onerous application, and it does take a couple of months. It takes 4.5, 5 months on an unopposed basis. So there is some time period in that, and then obviously you need to take that into consideration as well when you purchase the property. So know that you're not going to have rental income for that period. So factor that into your purchase price as well. It's one of those things. Okay.
Great. Well, thank you so
Daniela.
much, everyone. Thanks for joining
Thanks,
us.
guys.
And I hope you enjoyed it. And I'll send, I see one more question coming up, one more chat. Thank you all. Thank you, Zelinda. Thank you everyone for joining tonight. We really appreciate your time and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thanks.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.